there's a moment in life that feels strangely isolating. Not because you're alone, but because you're surrounded by people who don't see you. You speak, and they misunderstand. You explain, and they reduce it. You stay silent, and they assume weakness. And slowly, something unsettling becomes clear. Most people will never understand you, not because you failed to explain, but because they are incapable of hearing. This isn't arrogance, it's not bitterness. It's a psychological reality that few are prepared to face. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The deeper you think, the more alone you become. Most people don't live inwardly. They live on the surface, reacting, repeating, conforming. They borrow opinions. They outsource meaning. They fear standing apart because standing apart forces them to confront themselves. And when someone does step out, someone who thinks independently, questions deeply, lives inwardly, society doesn't celebrate them. It resists them. Why? Because understanding someone like you would require self-examination, and self-examination is terrifying. So instead, they simplify you, label you, dismiss you. You're overthinking. You're too serious. You're strange. You should just be normal. But what they're really saying is, your depth exposes my shallowness. This is the first warning most people miss. If you are truly becoming yourself, you will not be understood by the crowd. And that misunderstanding isn't accidental, it's structural. The majority live externally. You are beginning to live internally. And that creates friction. You feel it when conversations feel empty, when laughter feels forced, when advice sounds scripted, when belonging feels like self-betrayal. So you start asking dangerous questions. Why do I feel different? Why do I feel unseen? Is something wrong with me? No. What's happening is far more unsettling. You're waking up, and awakening doesn't make you relatable. It makes you uncomfortable to others, because once you see inwardly, you can't unsee it. And once you stop playing the role society rewards, you become a problem, not a loud problem, a silent one, someone who doesn't react, doesn't chase approval, doesn't need validation. And that kind of person terrifies a world built on consensus. This is where most people break. They retreat, they shrink themselves, they pretend to fit again. But that choice comes at a cost, because the more you betray your inner truth to be understood, the more you lose yourself. And that leads us to the deeper warning, the one that explains why society needs you confused, small, and misunderstood. Because understanding you would force them to face what they are avoiding in themselves. And once you see that, there's no going back. What you're experiencing isn't new. It's ancient. More than a century ago, Søren Kierkegaard warned about something most people still refuse to see. The crowd is not truth. The crowd doesn't think. It echoes. It doesn't understand. It normalizes. And this is where the real problem begins. The moment you start living inwardly, questioning, reflecting, refusing shallow answers, you step outside the logic of the crowd. And the crowd cannot follow you there. Not because you're superior, but because you're alone with your responsibility. See, the crowd offers something dangerously seductive. Relief. Relief from thinking. Relief from choosing. Relief from becoming. Inside the crowd, no one is accountable. No one has to define themselves. No one has to confront the anxiety of existence. You just adopt the approved identity, the approved opinions, the approved desires. And if you refuse, you become strange. Kierkegaard understood this better than anyone. He saw that the crowd survives by flattening individuals, by turning complex inner lives into simple labels. That's why they don't ask who you are. They ask what you do. They don't want your truth, they want your role. And the moment you stop playing it, something subtle happens. They don't attack you directly, they misunderstand you. They reinterpret your silence as arrogance, your depth as negativity, your restraint as weakness, not intentionally, instinctively. Because to understand you, they'd have to step outside the crowd themselves, and that requires courage. This is the trap most people fall into. They try to make themselves understandable to people who benefit from not understanding them. So they simplify their thoughts, dilute their language, hide their seriousness behind humor, wear a mask just to avoid friction. But here's Kierkegaard's brutal insight. The more you try to be understood by the crowd, the more you lose the self you're trying to express. Understanding becomes a negotiation, and authenticity is the first thing sacrificed. That's why you feel exhausted after certain conversations. Why you feel fragmented, like different versions of you exist depending on who you're with. That's not growth, that's disintegration. The crowd doesn't ask you to lie outright, it asks you to edit yourself. Just enough to fit, just enough to belong, just enough to be tolerated. And slowly, without realizing it, you trade inner truth for outer acceptance. This is the danger Kierkegaard warned about. Losing yourself while thinking you're being social. Because once you abandon your inner voice long enough, you stop hearing it. And when that happens, you don't just feel misunderstood by others. You become a stranger to yourself. This is why misunderstanding hurts so deeply. It's not about them. It's about the fear that if you're not careful, you'll disappear trying to be digestible. And that raises the real question, the one most people avoid. If the crowd cannot understand you, and understanding comes at the cost of self-betrayal, then what are you supposed to do? That's where Kierkegaard's warning becomes personal, and far more dangerous. Here's the part no one prepares you for. When you stop trying to be understood by everyone, you don't suddenly feel free. You feel alone. Not socially alone, but existentially isolated. And this is where most people panic, because loneliness is uncomfortable. Silence is confronting, and without constant validation, you're left with one terrifying task: facing yourself. This is where Søren Kierkegaard draws the sharpest line. He believed that becoming an individual, a real one, requires loneliness. Not as punishment, but as a passage. You see, understanding yourself demands inwardness, and inwardness can't be crowdsourced. No likes, no applause, no reassurance, just you and the weight of your own existence. That's why most people never go there. They keep noise around them, relationships without depth, opinions without reflection, movement without direction, anything to avoid sitting alone with their thoughts. But you don't have that luxury anymore. Because once you've seen through the crowd, returning feels dishonest. So you exist in a strange middle space, too deep for shallow conversations, too awake for blind conformity, too honest to fake enthusiasm. And that's when the misunderstanding becomes painful, not because others don't get you, but because you realize they never wanted to. They wanted comfort, predictability, sameness, and your presence disrupts that. So here's Kierkegaard's unsettling truth. Loneliness isn't the cost of being misunderstood. It's the proof that you're becoming yourself. The individual always walks alone at first. Not forever, but first. This is where people make a critical mistake. They assume loneliness means something is wrong. So they rush back, shrink their thoughts, lower their standards, rejoin conversations that feel empty just to feel included. But Kierkegaard would say this: if you escape loneliness too quickly, you escape yourself. Because solitude is where clarity forms, where values crystallize, where you stop asking, how do I fit? And start asking, what is true for me? That question changes everything. It changes who you listen to, who you trust, who you allow close. And slowly, almost invisibly, something shifts. You stop needing to be understood by everyone, because you understand yourself. And when that happens, misunderstanding loses its power. It still exists, but it no longer defines you. This is why not everyone should walk this path. It demands patience, integrity, and the strength to stand without applause. If this is resonating, not emotionally, but deeply, that's not an accident. It means you're already walking this road. And if you want to continue this journey, not for motivation, but for clarity, stay with this series. Because the final warning Kierkegaard gives explains what happens after you accept being misunderstood and why very few people make it that far. Don't rush ahead. Let that settle. There's a twist in Kierkegaard's warning that almost no one talks about. Sometimes, being misunderstood is safer than being understood, because the moment people do understand you, they don't always accept you. They try to use you. Søren Kierkegaard understood that society doesn't reward depth. It repurposes it. Once your clarity becomes visible, the world doesn't ask, "Who are you really?" It asks, "How can we fit you into something useful?" This is why truly self-aware people are rarely left alone. They're recruited, assigned roles, turned into symbols. The thinker becomes a brand. The observer becomes a mentor. The silent one becomes mysterious. And something subtle but dangerous happens. Your inner truth gets translated into something consumable. Your complexity is flattened into advice. Your struggle into inspiration. Your silence into aesthetic. Not because people are evil, but because society cannot tolerate what it cannot categorize. This is why Kierkegaard deliberately wrote indirectly, why he used pseudonyms, why he refused to be easily understood. He knew something critical. The crowd doesn't just misunderstand the individual. It destroys them once it understands them too clearly. Because once you're understood, you're no longer free. You're expected to be consistent, predictable, repeatable. You become responsible not to your truth, but to their expectations. And that pressure is heavier than misunderstanding. This is why many people sabotage themselves right before clarity. They soften their conclusions. They blur their boundaries. They hide behind ambiguity. Not because they're weak, but because they sense the danger of exposure. You've felt this, haven't you? The hesitation to say what you really think. The instinct to pull back right after being fully seen. The urge to disappear once attention arrives. That's not fear of rejection. That's fear of capture. Kierkegaard would say this: "To exist authentically, you must protect your inwardness. Not everyone deserves access to it. Not everyone can handle it. And not everyone will respect it. Understanding, when given too easily, becomes invasion. That's why selective silence isn't dishonesty, it's survival. This is where maturity reveals itself, not in being loud, not in being explainable, but in knowing when not to be understood. Because the self isn't built in public, it's built inwardly, away from applause, away from interpretation, away from reduction, and once you see this, another truth becomes unavoidable. Being misunderstood by the many may be the price of staying whole. But that leaves one final question, the most difficult one of all. If you're not meant to be understood by the crowd, and not meant to disappear into isolation either, then how are you meant to live? That's Kierkegaard's final warning, and it's the one that separates those who merely awaken from those who endure. Stay with me. Here is where Kierkegaard's warning reaches its sharpest edge. Once you accept that most people will never understand you, once you stop chasing the crowd's approval, once you protect your inward life instead of exposing it for validation, you are left with something far heavier than loneliness. Responsibility? Søren Kierkegaard believed the goal was never to withdraw from life. It was to stand inside it without hiding, not behind popularity, not behind roles, not behind borrowed opinions, but as a single individual, fully accountable for who you become. This is where most people quietly turn back, because living without being understood removes your excuses. You can no longer say, "They made me this way. They didn't support me. They didn't see me." When you stop seeking understanding, your life becomes brutally honest. Your choices are yours. Your compromises are visible. Your values are no longer theoretical. And this is what Kierkegaard meant by existence. Not existing as a profile, not existing as a function, but existing as a conscious being who chooses, even when choosing is painful. Here's the paradox most people miss. The moment you stop trying to be understood, you don't become disconnected, you become precise. You stop wasting energy explaining yourself to people who can't hear you. You stop negotiating your depth to fit shallow spaces. You stop confusing attention with connection. and slowly, something rare happens. Your life gains weight. Your words carry less volume, but more gravity. Your presence becomes calm instead of reactive. Your silence starts saying more than explanations ever could. This is why the right people eventually find you. Not the crowd, not the loud ones, but the few who have also paid the price of inwardness. They don't understand you completely, and they don't need to. They recognize coherence. And that's the difference. Kierkegaard warned that misunderstanding is not your enemy. Self-betrayal is. The real danger is not being unseen. It's shrinking yourself so others can digest you. That's how people disappear without ever leaving the room. So if you're walking this path, if conversations feel thinner than they used to, if approval feels hollow, if belonging feels conditional, nothing has gone wrong. You are simply no longer willing to live externally. And that choice changes everything. You begin choosing truth over comfort, depth over popularity, integrity over explanation. Not dramatically, quietly, day by day, decision by decision. This is what it means to live without being understood. Not as rebellion, not as bitterness, but as clarity. And clarity, once gained, cannot be unlearned. That's Kierkegaard's final warning. If you dare to become yourself, you will lose the crowd. But you will gain a life that is actually yours. And if this series didn't just interest you, if it described something you felt but never fully named, then stay connected. Subscribe. Not out of habit, but so you don't lose this way of thinking in a world that constantly pressures you to forget it. Because once you begin living inwardly, turning back is the one thing you'll never be able to do. Let that sit with you.